In 1849, in a half-built port town that people were already calling San Francisco, a man stepped off a ship, filled his lungs with cold salt air, and set out for the gold fields. He never got there. He stopped for one drink in a saloon near the water, and by sunrise he was lying in the dark belly of a ship, in chains, already 400 miles out to sea. Welcome to Mystery Wild West. What you are about to hear is not the version of the frontier anyone ever put on a postcard. If you want the kind of history that tells you something real instead of the same clean legend, subscribe. We dig deeper here than most. And one thing before we go on. Have you ever stepped into an old building, an old bar, an old hotel, and felt for just a second that something terrible once happened under your feet? Tell us in the comments. Because in these towns, that feeling was not your imagination. Here is the story most people carry in their heads. The West was freedom, open land, open sky. A place where a man could vanish and start over with nothing but his own two hands. And if someone disappeared, well, he wanted to. He rode off towards something better. That is not what happened, not to thousands of them. They did not ride off. They went down. Down through a hole in a floor, into a tunnel, onto a ship, and out of their own lives completely. Picture the waterfront at night. The gold rush has turned a sleepy bay into the busiest port on the coast. Ships crowd the water so thick you can almost walk across their decks. But look closer. Half of those ships are empty. No crew. The men who sailed them in dropped their bags, heard the word gold, and ran for the hills the same afternoon. The captains are stranded. And a stranded captain will pay almost anything for a body that can pull a rope. That is the whole engine of this thing. Demand. A ship cannot leave without men, and there are no men who will volunteer. So a new trade appears in the alleys, quiet and organized, and it has a simple job: fill the empty ships. It does not matter how. So picture the bay on a gray morning. A tall ship appears at the mouth of the harbor, her sails heavy, months of open ocean behind her. She has not even dropped anchor, and already the small boats are shooting out from the shore, oars flashing, men standing up in them and waving bottles over their heads. These were the runners. They raced each other across the water, climbed the side of the ship before she was fully still, and swarmed the deck like buyers at a market. Whiskey in one hand, a warm smile on the face. One goal only: get the crew off that ship before the tired men had time to think. Watch what happens to a sailor who has been at sea for half a year. He is worn to the bone. He is dreaming of a real bed and one honest drink. A friendly stranger throws an arm around his shoulder, presses a bottle into his hand, promises him the finest room in town, and even carries his sea bag for him like an old friend. By the time the sailor understands that the room is a trap and the bottle was the bait, his wages are already spent on paper, and his name is already promised to the next ship heading out. On the docks, these men had a name: land sharks. And the old joke along the water was that the real sharks in the bay were never the ones swimming. They were the ones in the boats, smiling. The men who ran this trade were not outlaws hiding in the desert. They wore clean coats. They ran boarding houses and bars right on the main streets. In town, they were called crimps, or boarding masters, and everyone knew their names. That is the first thing people get wrong. This was not a crime in the shadows. It was a business with a front door, and it ran like any other business, with a chain of hands and a cut for each one. At the top sat the men who owned the boarding houses and shook hands with the captains. Below them worked the runners who raced the boats and worked the docks. Then the bartenders, who knew to the drop how much it took to put a man down. Then the boatman who did the quiet rowing at low tide. Everyone had a task. Everyone took a share. And everyone had the same good reason to stay quiet, because the whole machine only worked as long as the people upstairs never admitted what happened downstairs. Think about that. A whole town, more or less, agreeing not to look. The bartender pours. The runner smiles. The clerk shrugs. The officer forgets. Not one of them pulls the lever alone, so not one of them ever has to feel like the guilty man. That is how something this ugly hides in broad daylight. You break it into small pieces, you hand each piece to a different man, and nobody has to call himself a kidnapper. They were all just doing their little job. So how did it work? Watch. A young man comes into town. Maybe a farmer who lost his farm. Maybe a miner who found nothing. He is tired, he is broke, and he needs a place to sleep. A friendly man meets him at the dock, shakes his hand, offers him a warm bed and a hot meal on credit. Just pay me later, friend, when you find work. The young man cannot believe his luck. He follows the friendly man home. Here is the problem. The bed is not free, and the debt is not real. It is a leash. Every meal, every drink, every night is written in a book, and the number only grows. And when a captain comes asking for bodies, the friendly man has a room full of them, all owed to him, all easy to move. So think about what that boarding house really was. On the surface, it looked like a kindness, a warm bed, a hot plate of food, a card game by the lamp in the evening. A man could finally rest there after months at sea or weeks alone in the hills. But every kindness had a price written quietly beside it, and the man was never shown the full page. He drank on credit, he ate on credit, he borrowed a clean shirt on credit, and the friendlier the smiles got, the deeper the hole underneath him. By the end of the week, he did not own his own time anymore. Somebody else did. He thought he was a guest. He was inventory. And the moment a captain walked in, needing bodies for the morning tide, that warm, friendly host would glance at his ledger, glance at the sleeping man in the corner, and do the arithmetic in about 2 seconds. Now the saloon. This is where it turns dark. A man leans on the bar, dust still on his boots, and orders a beer. The bartender smiles and slides it over. What the man does not see is the small bottle under the counter. A few drops go into the glass before it ever reaches him. Some called it knockout drops. Some called it a Mickey. It was often chloral hydrate, sometimes laced with opium, and it did one thing. It put a grown man to sleep in minutes, and the drink was only one of the tricks. There were others, and they were clever. A fine cigar handed over as a gift, its tip soaked in something that made the whole room lean sideways. A back room where the chairs and benches were rigged, so the moment a tired man sat down and let his shoulders drop, a lever tipped him backward through the floor before he could finish his sentence. In some places, the trick was nothing but patience. Keep the drinks coming all night on the house, friend, until the man simply could not stand. Free whiskey. Remember that phrase whenever you hear it. In these places, free whiskey was never free. It was a bill, and you paid it with your body. He takes a sip. The room tilts. He grabs the edge of the bar. His tongue goes heavy, and the voices around him stretch and blur. He thinks he is just drunk. He is not drunk. He is being harvested, and this is where the floor comes in. He slides off the stool. Nobody helps him. Nobody even looks. That is because everyone still standing works here. A section of the floorboards lifts on a hinge right there behind the bar or under a back table, and 2 men roll him into the dark. The trap door drops shut. The piano keeps playing. The next customer walks in and orders a drink over the exact spot where a man just disappeared. Stop and think about that for a second. The most dangerous thing in that room was not a gun. It was the floor, and the floors were built for the work. Not every saloon, but far more than anyone wanted to admit. A trapdoor cut clean into the boards behind the bar, a panel under a card table, hinged to swing down without a sound, a padded chute running from a back room straight to the cellar, cushioned just enough that the fall would bruise the goods without breaking them. Because broken goods did not sell. Some places got clever and cold about it. There are old stories of a barkeep who kept a stuffed dummy behind his counter so that on a night when live bodies ran short and a captain was owed his count, he could pass off a wrapped shape in the dark and be miles out at sea before anyone checked. Maybe a tale like that grew a little in the retelling, but the shape of it is exactly right. To these men, a person was not a person. He was stock, and stock had to move before the tide turned. Below the saloon, there was a world nobody upstairs talked about. Damp cellars, narrow tunnels, brick rooms with iron doors. Some of these ran under the streets and connected one building to the next, so a body could be moved a whole block without ever touching daylight. Down there, the air smelled of salt, mud, and rot. Men woke up in these cells with a pounding head, no idea where they were, and a locked door between them and the sun. And those tunnels carried more than kidnapped men. They carried everything the town wanted kept out of the daylight, crates of goods that never paid a cent of tax. Opium, moved quietly from one locked room to the next. People bought and sold for the rooms upstairs. The same darkness that swallowed a sailor also hit a dozen other trades, all stacked one on top of another beneath the streets, all sharing the same doors, the same damp air, the same silence. So a man waking in one of those cells was just one item among many. Above his head, people ate dinner, wagons rolled by, a piano played. Ordinary life went on, loud and bright and completely unaware, 3 feet above a room where a stranger sat in the dark, rubbing his wrists, trying to work out how a single beer had brought him here. And here is a detail that tells you everything. They were fed just enough. A crimp did not want a corpse. A corpse was worth nothing. A living man who could stand on a deck was worth good money. So they kept them alive, kept them weak, and kept them waiting for the tide. Time moved strangely down there. A man in a cell had no window, no clock, nothing but the sounds coming through the floor above. Footsteps, laughter, a chair scraping back. He learned to measure the hours by the noise of the bar, loud at night, dead by dawn. And he learned that the worst sound of all was the quiet one, the low voices gathering near the trapdoor, because quiet meant a captain had come, and a captain meant the tide, and the tide meant he was next. How much was a man worth? Let me put it in plain terms. A captain would pay what they called blood money, sometimes $50 or $60 a head, sometimes more when ships were desperate. That was a fortune then. It was more than many honest men earned in months, so every sleeping drunk on a barroom floor was not a person anymore. He was a paycheck with a pulse. And here is how the money really moved, because this is the part that makes your teeth grind. When a ship signed on a crew, each man was owed an advance, wages paid up front, before the ship ever left the dock. In a fair world, that money went into the sailor's own pocket. In these towns, it went straight into the hand of the crimp, passed over as the price for delivering the body. So follow it. The man was sold using his own wages. He paid for his own kidnapping and never touched a single coin of it. The captain got a warm body that could pull a rope. The crimp got the advance and the debt stacked on top. And the man got a bunk in the hold, a pounding head, and months of unpaid work ahead of him. Everyone in that deal walked away richer except the one person actually doing the labor. That was not a flaw in the system. That was the system running exactly the way it was built to run. Here is a question for you right now. If you knew the man next to you at the bar was about to vanish for 3 years, and speaking up meant you might be next, what would you actually do? Hold that thought. Most people did nothing. And that silence was the real machine. Now the ship. At low tide, a small boat slips up to a hidden dock under the buildings. The bodies are carried out, one by one, still limp, and dropped into the boat like sacks of grain. They are rowed out to a ship already raising sail. Up they go, over the side, down into the hold. The captain counts them, pays the crimp, and never asks a single name. The man wakes hours later. The first thing he feels is the roll. The floor under him lifts and drops, lifts and drops. He hears water against wood and the groan of rope. He opens his eyes to darkness and the stink of bilge and vomit. He crawls to a ladder, climbs, and pushes his head into open air. And there is nothing. No town, no dock, no coast. Just gray water in every direction to the edge of the world. That moment, that is the whole story in one breath. A man who went out for one drink is now property, at sea, with no way home. And those first days were the cruelest. A real sailor knew the ropes in his sleep. These men did not. They were farmers and shop clerks and broke miners who had never touched a sail in their lives, and now they were 40 feet up a swaying mast in a cold wind, ordered to work rigging they could not even name, with an officer screaming from the deck below and something worse, waiting, if they froze. There was no gentle lesson. You learned by being forced, in the wind, over open water, with nothing solid under your boots. A man who moved too slow got a rope end across the back. A man who lost his grip got nothing at all, because the sea does not stop for anyone. Nobody on that ship cared that he had never agreed to be there. As far as the deck was concerned, he was crew now, and crew worked, or crew paid for it, and there was no leaving. Look around from that deck, and there is your whole world: wood, rope, water, and a handful of hard men who decide whether you eat that day. A port might come after weeks, close enough to see the rooftops, close enough to ache. But the moment the ship touched land, the watch doubled. You did not go ashore. You stood at the rail and watched the shore instead, so near you could smell the smoke of other people's suppers. And then you watched it slide away behind you again. And here is where the word comes from. Many of these ships were bound across the Pacific on the long run to ports in Asia, including Shanghai. The voyage there and back could swallow years. So when a man was taken this way, people said he had been shanghaied. The word did not come from nowhere. It came from the length of the sentence. You did not lose a night. You lost a piece of your life. And the piece could be enormous. A run across the Pacific and back, or all the way around the bottom of the world, could last 2 years, sometimes 3. 2 years of salt beef and hard biscuit crawling with weevils. 2 years of storms that threw the ship onto her side, and cold that settled into the bones and would not leave. Men lost teeth to rotten food. Men lost fingers to frozen rope. And all of it was time carved out of a life that was still waiting somewhere on shore. Here is the quiet horror underneath it. Nobody at home ever learned the truth. There was no letter, no goodbye. One evening, a man was in town, and the next he simply was not. And the people who knew him filled that empty space with a guess. He ran off. He drank himself into the bay. He went looking for gold and died in the hills. The real answer, that he was 3,000 miles away, hauling rope against his will, never once made it back to the door he walked out of. A wife waited. A brother waited. And the truth was out on the water, where no one could hear it. And the few who did come back, years later, came back to a place that had already buried them. The job was gone. The room was rented to somebody else. The people who once waited had learned to stop waiting, because you cannot stand at a window forever. A man could walk into his own town, a stranger, older, harder, carrying a story so strange that half the people he told did not believe a word of it. He had not died, but the life he left behind had closed over the gap he made, the way water closes over a dropped stone. But it gets worse, because even now, even at sea, the money did not stop working against him. Remember that debt back at the boarding house. When the crimp handed the man over, he also handed the captain a bill. He claimed the sailor owed him for weeks of lodging, and by law and custom, the captain paid it, then took it out of the man's future wages. So the sailor did not just lose his freedom. He started the voyage already owing money for the privilege of being kidnapped. He would work the entire trip and step off at the end with almost nothing. And if he thought about jumping ship at the first port, the system had an answer for that too. Sign here or rot in a cell. The papers were waiting. His name would be written down as a man who agreed. On paper, he volunteered. On paper, everyone always volunteered. And that paper carried far more weight than you would ever expect. When a ship reached some distant port, and a man broke away to find the authorities, shouting that he had been drugged and stolen, someone would calmly produce the ship's articles with his name written right there on the line. See, they would say. He signed. He agreed to all of it. It did not matter that he had been dead asleep when the mark went down. It did not matter that the hand which held the pen was not his own. The document said one thing, and in that world the document always won. A living man's word, spoken to your face, counted for nothing against a line of dried ink he never wrote. So he was marched back up the gangway, and the ship sailed on. Who did this happen to? That is the second thing people get wrong. In the movies, the victim is always some tough gunslinger who had it coming. In reality, it was ordinary men, new arrivals who did not know the town, immigrants who did not speak the language, farm boys with soft hands, anyone alone, anyone tired, anyone who trusted the wrong friendly face at the dock. The safest thing in these ports was to be poor, ugly, and known. The most dangerous thing was to be a healthy stranger with money in your pocket. And it was not only the men taken to sea. In the same tunnels, behind the same iron doors, other people were being moved and sold for other things. Women lured with a job offer that did not exist. Boys grabbed off the docks. The trapdoor did not care who you were. It only cared that you fit through it. Let me show you just how ordinary a victim could be. A farmer rides in from the country to sell a whole season of goods. It was a good year. There is real money folded into his coat. He plans to be home in 3 days, maybe 4. So he stops for one hot meal and one drink to celebrate, because after a year of dawn to dark in the fields, who would not? He wakes up on a ship. Back home his fields go quiet. The animals wait to be fed. His family stands at the window as the light dies, listening for a horse that does not come. The money in his coat is gone, taken with him, or taken off him, and it makes no difference which. 3 days becomes 3 years, if it becomes anything at all. That is not the story of a hero riding into legend. That is the story of a good harvest, a full coat, and one single drink taken in the wrong room. Here is the part that should make you angry. The law knew. Of course it knew. This happened on main streets, in famous bars, for decades. The police walked past these buildings every day, but the crimps were rich, and rich men in these towns bought quiet the way you buy bread. A payment here, a favor there, a police captain who suddenly cannot find any evidence, and the ship owners, the men who needed the crews, they were the most powerful men on the coast. They were not going to shut down the one thing that kept their ships moving. So the system protected itself. A man reports his brother missing. The clerk shrugs. Probably ran off to the mines. A wife comes looking for her husband. Same answer. Men vanish here all the time. Lady, it is the frontier. And that shrug, repeated 10,000 times, is how a whole industry stayed invisible while operating in plain sight. Every so often, the noise got too loud to ignore, and the town would hold a trial. Watch how one went. The crimp sits in the courtroom in a clean, pressed suit, calm as a Sunday morning. The man he stole cannot testify, because the man he stole is somewhere in the middle of an ocean, if he is alive at all. The witnesses all happen to work in the same trade, and not one of them can seem to remember a thing. A police officer takes the stand, frowns, and finds that the details have simply slipped his mind. An hour later, it is over. Not guilty, or dismissed. And the crimp stands, straightens his coat, and walks back to his boarding house to open the doors for the evening crowd. The trial did not break the system. Look closer, and the trial was part of the system. It let the whole town feel like justice was alive and watching, without ever once asking justice to actually show up and do its job. Let me break another myth while we are here. People think this was one weird thing that happened once or twice in San Francisco. No, it ran up and down the coast for the better part of half a century. Portland had its own dark reputation for it. Other port towns did too. Wherever ships needed crews and the law could be paid to look away, the trade grew. This was not an accident of one bad town. It was a pattern, and it followed the same simple law everywhere it turned up. Ships that could not sail, men who would not sign, a gap between the two that somebody was always willing to fill for the right money. Change the town, change the year, and the story barely changes at all. A different bar, a different hinge in a different floor, the same tired stranger reaching for the same friendly glass. Now, I have to be honest with you, because we tell the truth here, and not just the legend. Some of the wildest tales got bigger over the years. Not every tunnel under every old building was a kidnapping route. Some cellars were just cellars, dug to move goods away from the mud and the tides. Storytellers later stitched every dark hole in the ground into one giant underworld. So when someone tells you the entire city was one connected kidnapping maze, take a breath. But here's the thing. The core of it is real. The drug drinks were real. The blood money was real. The men who woke up at sea were real, and there were far too many of them. The myth got decorated, yes. The crime underneath the decoration actually happened. So picture the daily reality of it. A boarding master sits in a warm office with a ledger open in front of him. A ship's officer comes in and says, he needs 6 men by the morning tide. The boarding master does not blink. He says he can do 8. They shake hands. That is it. That is the entire negotiation. 8 human lives, arranged like an order for barrels, over a handshake and a cup of coffee, and out in the bar a runner is already working. He spots a young man counting coins, alone, unsure. He walks over, warm as sunlight, and asks if he is looking for work, says he knows a captain, says there is good money in it. The young man, who has been hungry for a week, feels hope for the first time in days. He follows. He always follows. Hope is the bait. It always was. Here is your middle question, and I want you to really sit with it. When someone offers you exactly what you are desperate for, right when you are weakest, how carefully do you check who they are? These men were not stupid. They were tired and hopeful. And in that town, tired and hopeful was a death sentence dressed as a lucky break. Think about what it felt like to live in that town if you knew. You would learn small rules to stay alive. Never take a drink from a stranger. Never sleep in a bed you did not pay for in advance. If a man is too friendly at the dock, walk the other way. Watch the floor. Watch the floor. People actually learned to notice where the boards did not quite match, where a rug sat oddly, where a table never moved. And the fear did something quieter too. It taught people not to ask questions. If your neighbor was there one week and gone the next, you did not go looking. You told yourself he moved on. You had to, because the alternative was admitting that the ground could open under any of you at any time, and the town would just keep dancing over the spot. Now and then, a man did get lucky. Watch one. He feels the drink hit him wrong, that heavy pull behind the eyes, and some animal part of his brain starts screaming before it is too late. He shoves back from the bar. He knocks the glass to the floor. He stumbles for the door while the whole room tilts and the runners move to cut him off. Calm, unhurried, because they have done this 100 times. He makes it into the street on pure fear, falls in the mud, and crawls until there are strangers around him, and the men behind him melt back inside. He lived, but here is the cold part. He could not prove a single thing. Who would he even tell? The bar was open again the next day. The bartender still smiled, and the man learned the same lesson everyone in that town eventually learned. You do not fight it. You just try for the rest of your life never to be the one on the floor. But here is the problem with a system like this. It only works while the ships are desperate, and ships do not stay desperate forever. Slowly, things changed. The gold rush cooled. Steam began to replace sail, and steamships needed fewer men, and different men, trained men who could not just be scooped off a floor. The ports grew up. Newspapers started printing the missing names instead of shrugging at them. Families made noise, and that noise, finally, was harder to buy than a single quiet police captain. Then came the laws. New rules made it illegal to charge a sailor for his own lodging out of his wages, which was the exact trick that made the whole trade so profitable. Take away the debt, and suddenly, a kidnapped man was just a liability, not a paycheck. Rules were passed to protect crews, to register who was really on a ship and why. The blood money dried up. And a business built entirely on blood money cannot survive without it. So the trapdoors stopped opening. Not because the men who ran them found a conscience. They never did. It stopped because it stopped paying. That is the coldest truth in this whole story. What saved the next generation of young men at the bar was not mercy. It was arithmetic. And sit with what that actually says. For 50 years, the safety of a stranger at a bar came down to one question. Was his body worth more awake and free, or asleep and sold? When a captain would pay a fortune for a crew, the floor opened. When the money dried up, the floor stayed shut. human decency never once entered the room. The trapdoor was a business decision, opened and closed by the going price of a body, and for 2 full generations that price was the only thing standing between a tired man and the bottom of a ship. By the early 1900s, the trade was mostly finished, the tunnels filled with junk and water. The saloons changed hands. The trapdoors were nailed shut or paved over or simply forgotten. And the men who had run the whole thing, most of them died old, comfortable, and respected in the same towns where they had sold their neighbors to the sea. That is the part that stays with me. Nobody rode in to save the day. There was no shootout at high noon that ended it. It just faded quietly, the way it had started, and the town moved on and turned it into a spooky story for tourists. Walk one of those ghost tours today and listen to how it gets told. A cheerful guide, a flashlight, a joke about the ghost of some old sailor. The crowd laughs. Somebody takes a photo, and the real thing, the drugged glass, the hinge in the floor, the years stolen from ordinary men, gets flattened into a fun hour in the dark. That was the last trick the trade ever played. It turned its own victims into entertainment. But walk those old waterfront blocks now, and some of it is still down there. Bricked-up rooms, old iron rings set into cellar walls, the kind you would tie a rope to, or a man. Beams worn smooth in a way that does not quite make sense. The buildings kept the receipts even after the people agreed to forget. So let me leave you the way we started, with the man who wanted one drink. He was not a hero. He did not have a name we can put on a monument. He was just tired and thirsty, and one step behind a friendly smile. That is who this happened to. Ordinary people in an ordinary moment, in a town that had quietly decided their lives were for sale. And that is what most people get wrong about the Old West. They think the danger was out on the open range, in the duel, in the ambush, on the trail. But some of the most dangerous places on the frontier were not out in the wild at all. They were warm. They were lit. They had a bar and a piano and a friendly man who bought you a drink. So here is my last question for you, and I mean it. Next time you walk into some beautiful old building, some restored saloon with the original floorboards, and the guide tells you a cute little ghost story, look down. Ask yourself what those boards were really for. Then tell me in the comments. What is the oldest place you have ever stood in that suddenly felt a lot less charming once you knew the truth? Because the real history of the West is not the one they sell at the gift shop. It is quieter and colder, and it is usually right under your feet.